Welcome, everybody, to the SNN Network Summer Virtual Event. I'm your host, Robert Kraft, and I'd like to introduce our next educational panel for our event. This panel is really, it's a general markets overview in cannabis. You know, we have a few companies on here that are going to be, represent different industries and sectors within the cannabis space. And let's get an update. You know, we did a panel very similar to this at our last event at the Planet MicroCap Showcase. So each of them, we'd love to know what's going on. So moderating today's panel to help us out here is Claire Aitchison. She is the head of research at Independent Investment Research. And with that, Claire, take it away.
Thanks for that, Bobby. And hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel. Excited for you to join us today. Just a quick disclosure. As Bobby said, I'm the head of research at Independent Investment Research. No one in IIR owns any shares, and we don't currently provide any coverage over these companies. So just to get that out of the way. Today we are joined by Rob Davidson, who is the CEO of CURR Pharmaceuticals, and Jason Warnock, who is the Chief Revenue Officer of Flora Growth Corporation. And as Bobby said, both these companies have a common thread of being in the cannabis industry, even though they're very different from an operational standpoint. So today we're going to learn a little bit more about these two companies, and we're also going to get our panelist view on the cannabis market and its growth prospects. So thanks very much for joining us, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate that.
Great to be here.
Jason, why don't we start with you? Can you just tell us a little bit about the Flora Growth Corp business?
Absolutely. So thanks again, Claire and Rob, Bobby. So Flora Growth Corporation is really an organization that was built fairly recently. We just completed our IPO in May of this year in 2021, but had been kind of incubating for a number of years behind that. The company is really made up of a number of divisions. Probably the largest thing you might have heard is we have a large all-organic farm in Cossachemos, which is near Bucaramanga in Colombia. But beyond that, we actually have several divisions that are actually operating in many different facets, from food and beverage to hemp textiles to phytotherapeutics to beauty and skincare and wellness brands. So we kind of split the difference between being a large, low-cost producer of cannabis for the world market, as well as having a large, extensive CPG-style portfolio across many divisions and operate in many countries simultaneously.
Okay. So the company is targeting both the medicinal cannabis market, but also the CBD, CPG market with topicals and food and beverage. Why this strategy?
Well, you know, unfortunately, being a Canadian, I guess we saw the kind of the first set of the cannabis the growth in the market, and saw that many companies were translating size into value as they try to build for a future market that they did not have control over as they waited for larger entrants to eventually come on the scene. I'm sure Rob will talk more about the pharmaceutical industry and the pathways that take those ones through. But from a consumer product category, when we consider non-psychoactive cannabis, there was large markets that were developing, or I think people felt would develop over time. And our interest was to develop a very large asset base from a very extensive organic farm producing GACP products, and build within that the infrastructure to supply the world. So EU GMP facilities, other GMP facilities, that takes time. And you can be like every other cannabis company and just go on size and so forth. But we took the alternative strategy of let's look out for brands that are in the market today, whether through acquisition, whether through joint venture, whether through white labeling. We've really looked at how we can meet the supply chain in advance of our existing own APIs or inputs, and make sure that we establish market presence in all markets that we operate, whether it's in Australia, whether it's in the UK or the EU, wherever that we operate. So we do have this amazing asset base of really premium, amazing cannabis on deck, but we built out our front loaded of the CPG portfolio because it allows us to actually participate and grow as a company while we bring our APIs on behind it.
Okay. And so just focusing on the medicinal cannabis market for a moment, where do you see the growth prospects for medicinal cannabis over the next 5 years?
That's a good question. So there are a lot of factors I think people rightly claim and rightly look at the different regulations and structures of what we see in medical cannabis. And we all know that the scheduling conflicts that are at the UN and at many levels, including the United States, have limited the overall adoption of medical cannabis, primarily because of research. Let's be honest, is there's a limited amount of really compelling research to push this into most pockets of the world. And I think we all kind of know anecdotally, and I'm sure there's more information coming online, but these are real beneficial products. And there's obviously some high profile ones like Epidiolex and their acquisition through Jazz, but there is still a lot more to go in the space. Obviously, the endocannabinoid system presents numerous opportunities for companies focused on pharmaceutical to deliver and develop different modalities across many patterns. I think the changing thing that we're looking for is a rescheduling of this from a global standpoint, a reduction in the structure that has restricted the banking laws, like the Safe Banking Act in the US, for example, and just bring about the ability to translate research into products and bring these products forward from a more holistic view. Because right now it's anecdotal in a lot of places. And while I do think the stigma has been diminished, we're still missing that large scale pure research to bring the real medical communities behind this.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there. Absolutely, Jason. Could I add something or ask a question if you don't mind, and maybe just leave? You talked about, you asked a question about medical cannabis. It's interesting, in the US, you probably know that line is not well defined between recreational and medical, because now you have more and more states in the US going recreational. How is that defined in Canada? I know it's defined well in other markets in the EU. Latin America is starting to define those, but as far as Canada, it's pretty specific, isn't it, for between medical and rec, or is it similar to the US?
So a little bit similar, a little bit different. Okay. So just, the Canadian evolution was in, if I could draw a parallel, a little bit like what happened in Mexico right now. The Supreme Court has stricken down the restriction that everyone should have the right of access of medical cannabis, whether or not the prescription, how that works, that's the first pass. Mm-hmm. When that happened in Canada, back in early 2000, it was, that's all the way back to 2003. That was already completed years and years ago. So then Canada kind of had to work through a series of legislative hurdles, whether it was the MMAR, which was the medical marijuana access regulations, then it was to the all these different structures until 2018, finally, 15 years later, when they came in with the Cannabis Act that restructured. So medical access to cannabis in Canada was produced initially through the LP network, the licensed producer network, and then it had to be prescribed and delivered under that thing. That still exists today, to be frank, and everything exists in that structure. However, with a large infrastructure of now distribution through retail channels, your average consumer who may be difficult for their doctor to prescribe or to feel like they're not understanding has much more ability to go in and communicate with a bud tender or whomever their retailer is and appropriate. So there are levels that exist, and medical cannabis is a protected structure in the Canadian system, but it is not, there's the patient growth topped in 2018 and has remained consistent. There's no more growth of medical patients because I think people are now self-medicating.
Self-medicating, yeah. I think that's one of the true critical mass drivers of the whole cannabis movement, is that people are taking health into their own hands now more than ever. I think the pandemic's helped with that as well. People are going out and buying vitamin D and supplements that are help the immune system. So I think that's a big critical mass movement. I think you're going to see some strong growth in that area, especially in the US.
And I think the US is, I think it's unassailable now to start to talk about that there is not medical benefits to cannabis.
Right.
I mean, we're, of course, like our companies are in this arena, so obviously, but I think it's really kind of become unassailable. There are so many aspects of CBN and CBG and all the different endocannabinoid systems that can interact here. It's just a matter of now, how do we effectively bring those to the market? There is a lot of, I hesitate to say, snake oil, but there's a lot of claims made and there's a bunch of things getting thrown around. We do really need medical style companies to come forward and build these modalities to appropriate conditions. And we want to make sure that they're consistent. The dosing is accurate each time. I think the recreational market sometimes dabbles in craft style production. And so you have wonderful varietals and strains and tinctures or chocolates or gummies, but you may not have a systematic, clear dosing application, and you may have differences. And when you're talking medical, you know, you have to really build to avoid all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important.
So.
Great.
So Jason, quality standards in medicinal cannabis, they're important. So what is Flora Growth Corp doing to ensure proper standards from seed to sale?
It's a really great question. So at two-phase, let me think about from the plant standpoint. We have to look at what's the best we can produce are the actual the weed, the actual plant, the plant that's on the ground. So there are lots of different variation in the structure of that. And we are very fortunate in Colombia to have really the equatorial growing conditions within the space that we occupy in a very large facility and farm in order to have the conditions that are ideal. So high elevation, constant wind, 7 different sources of water on the property, the wind to go, of course, to diminish and limit pests and things. We can use complete organic production, not having to rely on pesticides. And then just even the appropriation of I was just there this last week when the clouds come in and give us the right amount of humidity, they go away at certain points. We're really able to maximize the growing conditions. So hopefully that's the first thing, is you have a beautiful plant that's been produced in the ideal growing conditions. And then I think about, you know, our CPG model. We want to deliver customers experiences and across those different things, whether that's in skincare, wellness, or a beverage, or whatever it is that they're going to be experiencing, whether that's CBD or CBG or another cannabinoid, eventually to like a THC product as well. We want to make sure that our customers globally can appreciate that all the care that went into that original farm can meet them at the consumer. So seed to sale is often tossed around as being a barcode or a QR code that gets stuck in a box and we're like, yeah, we've got it covered. Realistically to us, we look at 3 levels of control. A forensic level of control, understanding the actual tissue that goes into our propagation and understanding that, and ensuring that with basically a system of tagging them at a molecular level and protecting the product right down to the core. Wherever that product may travel, in whatever form it takes, we'll know it came from Flora. Above that is the standard government structure of making sure that when we produce 300 kilograms of cannabis, it is documented, structured, appropriately put into the structure, and then actually communicating this to our client base. Because we have both white label, JVs, our own brands, we need major labels and brands to be able to see into our systems and communicate where are the COAs, where are the testing results, what are the microbials, what's the heavy metal reports. We need to be able to fully integrate that system. So we look at advances in blockchain, we look at interconnectivity of all of our different products globally, have that mid-level seed to sale infrastructure, and then all the way down to the forensic level to make sure that we can control it. So we really take this aspect very seriously, because the brands that we want to work with on a global scale demand that level of transparency, as well as authentication and provenance of material. Colombia, you know, I get lots of questions. Oh, do you have armed guards or the cartels running up on you? We operate as though a global CPG company, and we need to prove to everyone, if we have, you can ensure the product is the best, and you can ensure what comes in that bottle, drink, chocolate, skin cream is going to be the same thing we promised when it left the farm.
Okay. Sounds like you're doing it pharmaceutical kind of play there. I like that.
Well, you know, you're right. Pharmaceuticals, same kind of problem.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
I think, you know, and personally, I get a little, again, I've been around this block, you know, in the recreational side, there's always a fear of mine was eventually liability will come back. Someone with a counterfeit operation can easily, and this happened a little bit in the vaping world where we've had counterfeit vape cartridges that were purported to be that. We take that estimation very seriously. If someone was to get sick or something and say, well, this was a Flora product, we want to be able to prove, regardless of where it was, exactly what the material was. And that's a very pharmaceutical style production. But as we're not a recreational grower that's just there to make high quality bud for a segment, we're looking at this a much larger operation and ensuring that every step of the way we're meeting that expectation. There's insurance, there's medical efficacy, there's so many pieces that come with that, but we got to start with a solid foundation.
That's great. It's great to hear that.
And so as the global medicinal cannabis market starts opening up, how will Flora differentiate its products from competitors? Obviously, brand awareness and knowing that it's a Flora product is very important, as you've just touched on. So how will you differentiate yourself?
I think medical, and maybe Rob would be better to talk about this one. this one a little better than me. Medical will be a contingent of us. We have a phytotherapeutic business in the sense of producing custom formulation that we can produce in Latin America for very specific pharmaceutical. But our main thrust from Flora will be in research and understanding the impacts of these modalities, as well as this kind of wellness category that sits behind it. So we have a GMP lab in Bogota that supports and already produces over 300 products that fit the CPG category and wellness, but not necessarily in medical. Medical cannabis, again, I say you're looking at both individual molecule reduction and looking at very specific segments of modality as well as very specific conditions, and you're trying to produce those with under structure, which we're much more a larger kind of just a step below that. It's an important part of us. We want to look at research and bringing the science forward, but it won't be our primary focus on medical. Sorry, Rob, and I know this is more your lane than mine.
You're right on track though with that. But the nice thing about your approach is you're understanding the consumer is looking at wellness and really taking wellness and health into their own hands, and you want to give them the best product. That's not out there. There's a lot of companies not doing that, and it's great to hear that you are doing that, because it does play together, right? Medical, pharmaceutical, we'll call it, and recreational and wellness, they all play together. Most people are using cannabis for some type of health issue. Is it anxiety or sleep or pain? So, to be able to offer something that has that quality control and, you can track it to you, like you said, to the patient and really know that it came from Flora. When was it produced? When was it manufactured? What genetics did it come from? Yep. All the above, those are really key, important points, and not far off from how you would do a API for pharmaceutical. It's very similar. Pharmaceutical, to your point, is you're looking at more isolated molecules, you're looking at specific indications, and you're looking at certain processes, they call it DMFing the product, and really going through a stringent overall process to make sure you're getting the same exact molecule every time, that you're extracting, or sometimes you'll see biosynthesized or synthetic. So, yeah.
And I agree. We'll bump up against it, but our product category sits just below. Again, I'd like to think that we're building the structure to operate whatever brand that you would look at in the market. If they're coming to look at, how do I enter the CBD space? How do I get into this? What's happening with CBN? I'm looking at these different structures. We're going to be operating to provide value to those types of customers at the highest level. But again, we're not a pure medical scientific one. We've made some announcements recently, and we're going to continue to do so, but we think research and pushing the ball forward, I guess, for the community is going to be significant, but we're much more concerned about the larger breadth. However, to be fair, one of the great advantages of Florida is we have this amazing facility. We're growing 247 hectares eventually of organic cannabis so we're going to be providing those dry inputs, whether we're at extraction through our facility there, to medical producers who won't be producing their own, we won't be producing their medical products, but right. It goes down the chain.
Right, great. That's exciting.
And what will Flora Growth investors be talking about in 12 months' time, do you think?
Well, I think that probably the growth. I mean, to be fair, Flora is just new on the scene. I think a lot of people don't know what we are or what we have. I think there's a lot of things that we're excited to begin announcing here. So, the company is fairly new, and I think it has the impression that it's following the same playbook, perhaps, as all the other big Canadian cannabis producers. Size means value. And that playbook has really gone out the window, thankfully. While we do have a low-cost input, and we do push ourselves to be the lowest cost input we can provide, the ability to meet and live with a customer who's learning about this industry, who's experiencing, as Rob said, self-medicating perhaps, or self-diagnosing like pain or having trouble sleeping or just anxiety, or there's so many aspects of these products, and skincare, like just having a really excellent product that they'd like to use in their daily routine. Getting to know and live in those spaces has been important. So I think, for a year from now, I'd hope we look back and say, how did these guys do it? They have immediate revenues. They're already shooting off all these things. It's because, again, we went kind of backwards. We built a huge asset that will bring value forward, but we went out and started living with the customers on the first day we began operations. So that's what I hope next year we come back and say, how did they grow so fast? They didn't follow the playbook as everyone else. That's exactly my number one thing I'd like to see.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. All right, Rob, let's move on to CURR Pharmaceuticals. So a bit of a pivot to a drug delivery company. So can you tell us a little bit about your drug delivery platform and your drug delivery technologies?
Absolutely. Thank you, Claire. And Jason, very exciting. We'll have to talk a little bit about some of the API we can get from you.
I'd love to. But I mean, just in the last point on that, I mean, the big significance for us is Colombia has just changed the law, right?
Yeah.
We knew it was coming, but eventually the idea that we can now supply APIs anywhere in the world. Yes.
Which is really nice. I've been following that. That's really amazing.
So that position, you know, strategically we went into this knowing that would eventually come, but it's nice that it's here.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I'll give a little background. So we have a CURR Pharmaceutical developed really a drug delivery platform with specific different dose forms, mainly thin film technology, very similar to Listerine strips. We have that type of technology. We also have transdermal. We do other types of sublingual delivery systems. But the point really is to make it specific for the molecule we're delivering, whether it's a lipophilic or, you know, hydrophilic molecule, difficult molecule to get into the body and into the blood. We're trying to make the patient experience more effective, number one, from an efficacy standpoint, and more pleasurable from, you know, taking medications. So if you imagine, you know, the company was founded on the premise of delivering pediatric malaria medication into third world countries in Africa because, you know, patients, they had to take 2 powders, mix it in clean drinking water, drink it, and that's how they took their medication. Well, if you were in some of the countries I was back in the day, you realize that they don't have clean drinking water. So they were mixing it in juices and Cokes and Pepsi. So it was basically degrading the active, right? They weren't getting what they could have to treat the malaria. And you had kids that were, you know, quite frankly, dying from malaria that's treatable. So that's how the company was born. Really molecule agnostic in a sense, where we believe we could take different drug, you know, molecules, APIs, so to speak, and deliver more effectively. We love working with lipophilic molecules like cannabis because it is difficult to deliver. You guys probably read a lot of studies on bioavailability and how much gets absorbed. It's tricky, and you know, and precise dosing is tricky with cannabis, with edibles and different other dose forms. You probably hear stories, right? I took a brownie and I ate another one because it didn't do anything. And then 6 hours later, they were on the floor, right? So we look at precise dosing, driving the active through the buccal mucosa, which is between the cheek and gum, sublingual. We're fully vertically integrated. We have our research and development lab. We have testing lab. We have manufacturing facility. We do everything from A to Z. We are DEA Schedule I licensed. If you're familiar with that, that's the only way you can play in the pharma cannabis space in the U.S. You need that DEA Schedule I license. And Jason, I'm sure you know how difficult that is.
It's a major one. It's one of the hardest there is in the world.
It's not easy. We have a full CGMP, FDA registered facility. So basically, we look at these molecules like cannabis, cannabinoid molecules, which I'm excited about, 140 something different cannabinoid molecules in the plant, you know, over 400 biologically active molecules, you know, in total, maybe more than that. We're discovering new ones all the time. Have some significant, you know, therapeutic properties. So we looked at that and we started a relationship with Technion Institute out of Israel. And we're looking at really, you know, leveraging our delivery systems with some of the combinations of these different molecules that are effective in different disease states and indications. So that's kind of how the company really morphed into cannabis and really looked at, you know, how do we help people really take the right dosing, the precise dosing, and know they're getting what they're taking, right? And it's everything Jason mentioned, from, you know, the time you grow the plant to extraction to QA, QC, make sure there's no metals in there, and, you know, all the things needed. But then the last component is, what's the dose form do you deliver it in, right? You know, for cancer patients, can they swallow pills or drinks? It's a little more difficult, but can they take a thin film that dissolves under the tongue or in the cheek and gum? It's a lot easier for them. You know, they don't have the same, you know, they don't throw it up. So, you know, so they're getting the active into the blood. It's an antiemetic in itself, so that's a good thing. So there's many benefits to the different dose forms that we deliver. And the difficulty is pharma's not fast. So as opposed to what Jason's doing, you know, it's a real long process. But, you know, again, it's a needed process because I do believe a lot of these cannabinoid molecules that, when in combinations, have some great effectiveness. And we're seeing that at some of our research in Israel on different disease states. And we need to do more research. We need to make sure we're delivering it effectively all the time. So we do a lot of PK studies, bioequivalency studies, and we manage the process from phase 1 clinical IND filings all the way through to the the end point, and we look to partner too with the other pharma companies. So really, we're dose form specific, if that makes sense.
Okay, and so you've just touched on it just when you're speaking then, but maybe you could explain to our listeners how the formulation and delivery of drugs can enhance their safety and efficacy. Maybe you could just go into detail a little bit about that if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So usually when you take I won't get too far into the science, but when you take a lipophilic molecule and you deliver it in a liquid or in almost any form, it has very low bioavailability, meaning it doesn't get into the blood very effectively. It's not very stable of a molecule. What we do is we basically use our proprietary polymer systems and encapsulation technologies, and we create that Trojan horse, if you will. The active is surrounded by an encapsulant or an emulsion, or it could be a liposome particle, or anywhere from nanoparticles to microparticles we can play with, and really protect the active, number one, key, make it more stable, and specific dosing, make sure you have permeation enhancers to really get the active into the blood. You don't want it degrading in the gut because it will degrade and you won't get the active that you need. So if you can bypass that first pass metabolism, you've probably heard the story. You swallow something, goes in the gut, it gets degraded, it cleaves, it goes into the liver, gets cleaved more and gets filtered more, which is natural for your body. It's important. But if you're taking an active, then you want to get specific dosing. Buccal delivery, sublingual delivery is one of the closest to, injectables and IV. So that's what we deal with.
Yeah, great. And obviously this is about cannabis. So can you tell us a little bit about your licensing agreement with the Canopy Growth Corporation?
Well, so we did have a licensing agreement with them. They did pivot away from using the pharma. They did not want to go the pharmaceutical route. So we're no longer working with them.
Okay.
So we pivoted away from them. We're working with a couple of other pharmaceutical-driven companies. I think Constellation Brands back in the day came in and really took over Canopy. I think, as Jason mentioned, they divested a lot of their different areas because they were trying to grow big fast with acquisitions and multiple arms, and big's not always better. And they just could not keep up with everything they were doing, and they didn't have the capital really at that point. So we pivoted. We've parted ways, and we're working with a couple of other groups. We just announced a partnership with BRC, Biopharmaceutical Research Corp, the great company, ex-military, great guy, George. He's an ex-Navy SEAL, and we're really looking at working with veterans, that have issues, PTSD, pain, things like that. Working with them on the pharmaceutical side and developing products, for those needs. That's really important to us.
Can I ask a question? Can I throw in one there, Claire? I'm curious. Rob, I know a little bit about you guys from before, but this is purely speculative on my part. So I know a bunch about the bioavailability and the process, but I've always been intrigued by the pharma side dealing with the anecdotal structure of broad spectrum. The idea that the entourage effect of cannabis is not fully understood, and they're looking to kind of slice it. How do you?
That's a great question.
How do you kind of slice that when you're thinking about bioavailability within certain molecules?
It's a great question, because some of these terpenes and flavonoids in the plant, when accompanied with a cannabinoid, it could be any, it could be CBD, CBN, show some increased bioavailability, right? Because of the combination or more effectiveness, known as the entourage effect. The difficulty on the pharma side is just that the regulatory agencies don't understand it and don't accept that you can do a full spectrum oil and get that approved as a drug. What are they used to? The FDA, TGA, which if you're in Australia, they're used to isolated molecules, right? I want a defined molecule. I want to know how it works. I want at least a postulated theory on mechanism of action. And I want to know, you can do 1 or 2 molecules. When you get to 3, look it up. There's not many approved drugs with multiple molecules. So that is difficult. We are working on the botanical side to help change that a little bit and change that thought process. We're not there yet. The FDA just turned down, I think, 2 applications to make CBD. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but to make CBD more of a dietary supplement, specialty food, just like EU's trying to do.
Whole foods, yeah.
Yeah, FDA turned it down. So they're not there yet. It's still going to be a cumbersome process. So right now we're looking at isolated molecules, maybe 1 or 2 molecules, rather than the broad spectrum. But I'm excited about the potential of the broad spectrum because I see it in the research, and I see it in our studies with with some of the groups we work with in Israel. Some phenomenal effects. So, yeah, that's a great question, though.
Very good question. All right, so I'll just open it up to both of you here, and Jason touched on it a little bit earlier about the stigma around cannabis, both in a medicinal sense and also a recreational sense. Do you think the stigma is reducing a little bit, or do you think it's still rife and upfront?
Jason, you want to go first?
Well, I was gonna say, so here, I always like to tell my own anecdotal story. So
yeah, great.
When I was younger, my parents were musicians and traveled around, and I've been around the cannabis industry. But I'm old enough to say I was the Alex Keaton in my family. I immediately went to business school, went to play football, and not necessarily turned my back on it. But it wasn't even from stigma. It was just not, I considered a lifestyle or additional to that. And so if you fast forward to whatever I am now and look back, I would have not expected to be at the place I was. So having been now in the, as an executive in the cannabis industry for the last 7-8 years now, I've really seen the stigma each year get reduced. And I can say both from my personal experience of traveling around the world, and I've had the good fortune to be in Israel and Africa and Switzerland and all these different places, and just seeing the dropping of it each year has been remarkable. And as I said, the science has become almost unassailable. Like, we're getting there regardless.
Absolutely.
The stigma of, frankly, structural racism within some of the terminology and the impact of the barriers, I think, thankfully, as a society, we're pushing them back. I think, and it's not your question, Claire, but I think the final hurdle in this is going to be expungement. Is going to be, how do we really deal with the impacted in the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by this globally, and get this back, an expungement of those records back to an even playing field. And unfortunately, I'm an eternal optimist. I love the science. I see this coming in many places, but that question for some will be the final hurdle, I think, in this larger final answer of this, moving it off what the stigma had before.
Yeah. No, likewise. I think that's a good, that's exactly right. I have a little different experience, Jason, than you did. My parents were not musicians. My dad was in law enforcement.
Maybe the opposite.
For many years. Obviously I did not want to get beat up by my dad, so I stayed away from any cannabis. But no, truthfully, my dad and my mom, who are older, have some arthritis and some issues, started taking CBD themselves. I mean, they like, well, what do we do? How do we take? We believe it. It's a plant. It's natural. I see the studies. I see the research. My dad's a prolific reader. He reads everything. So he said, look, it makes sense. Why wouldn't I try it? So I figured if he can get there, and I can tell you he was against it. If he can get there, a lot of people can get there. And you are seeing it. You're seeing it across the board, even in our countries, in sports, right? NFL, NBA, they're talking about allowing, CBD use for pain and the CBD topicals. So you see it happening. I'll tell you, I see it even more when you have, we are dabbling in the CPG world a little bit. I didn't mention this, and I should have, but we purchased a company called CURR Labs recently. They're a fairly new purchase, and they're really concentrated on skincare. That's really their main goal, skincare, using the different cannabinoid molecules, terpenes, CBD, not just CBD, but some peptides combined with that. And we signed on Nicole Kidman, and from your hometown, not your hometown, but your home country, in Australia. And she's our spokesperson. And just to see the entertainment world, you know, even going out there and putting their name on a brand that has CBD in it, I think we've come a long way. I mean, you know, yeah, Cheech and Chong has always been, you know, branding cannabis, but you know, as far as you know, your mainstream entertainers, I mean, you see that happening. So I definitely see that groundswell. I always tell people the train's left the station. You're not going to stop it, and the groundswell is happening, and the critical mass is there. So it's exciting times, I think.
I think so too. And I would just, the last point of that is just, you know, I also want to, there's been a lot of that, you know, initially willful disobedience or something, you know, the breaking down of these stigmas and a lot of the pioneers. I mean, I sometimes show up in these places as the suit and the business guy trying to, it's not that we're capitalizing on what's been done. It's just that we've kind of caught up as a society to what's been going on. So I always kind of walk in these meetings thinking, I'm not here to dump on the people that have spent, you know, put their own lives or potentially their, you know, things at risk. And there's been a lot of science even developed from, I know I've met people around the world. And again, we talked about Israel and all the pioneering that was done. So it's just nice to see it all come together now and bring these things to light. And if we can help shed some of that larger spotlight on these, you know, the advances, I always feel better about it. So I'm pretty happy to see as a global society, we've moved away from, you know, we're trying to move away from opioids and we're trying to get more into holistic things. And I think Rob's point about the pandemic has not slowed that thinking down. I think we all could be a little healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great message, actually. We can all be a little healthier, right? Mm-hmm. And you see it. You see with the pandemic, it's not affecting healthy individuals as much as it is people having some complications and typical complications like high blood pressure. That's a pandemic in itself in our society, right? Definitely endemic in certain areas in the U.S. But, you know, so you look at that and obesity and other issues, lack of sleep, you know, stress levels. We are definitely killing ourselves, and we're opening ourselves up to, you know, additional, you know, pandemics because of that. But you look at a healthy person, somebody's taking care of themselves, really focused on their own wellness. I think that definitely helps stave off some of these serious effects.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so just to finish up, we'd be remiss not to talk about the size of the cannabis market and also the growth prospects. Jason, we touched on that a little bit with you before, particularly about the medicinal cannabis market. It's valued currently, the cannabis market, at about 20 billion, I think, at last check, and it's expected to grow exponentially in the coming years. Do you both think that the growth will eventuate? And what do you see as the key drivers of this growth? Jason, I know you touched on research, particularly in the medicinal cannabis. Outside of the research for medicinal, is there anything else that you see will be key drivers for the market in the coming years?
Banking, safety of banking, safe harbor for banks. So there is still an institutional structure that limits banking, safe banking and insurance for major companies around the world. And while that's impacted, you know, in Canada, so that's where I live in Canada, and you know, we think, oh, the Cannabis Act passed in 2018, you should be fine. You should be able to have no problems. If I wanted to be a cannabis entrepreneur and I had some formulation, some tea, something else, I don't know, and I wanted to start it, banks are still all connected to one another. And so the US banking institution have an ability to limit it from Australia to Colombia to wherever. And so without safe banking and protection from prosecution, a bank is limited because their entire asset base can be frozen, and you have to make sure that that opens the doors to global commerce. Again, the WHO and, you know, the rescheduling in the US, and those are major driving force. But I think the first domino will be safe banking, and with that, we can begin to really start to go towards research, go towards more entrepreneurs. And I don't see it slowing down, because cannabis is a much bigger thing when you really get your arms around it. There's always going to be a dry flower community who's it's almost like an artisanal wine country, who will always love the best premium products from within region and within growers, and you know, that's never going to go away. But as Rob was saying, as we really start to expand the idea of cannabis into obesity and high blood pressure and anti-anxiety, and when you start to think of the over-the-counter market in general, it's just a massive opportunity. Veterinary products we talk about, obviously cosmetics, and there are so many industries that this will touch. I think it's really a diminished to say even 20, 30 billion, whatever you just said there, Claire. I think that's the actual market, I think is so much bigger than people even understand.
I agree. And Jason, you mentioned, I think early in the intro, that you are also working on textiles, right? I believe probably fibers from the hemp plant,
correct,
bioplastics down the road, biofuel. Hemp is an amazing, just you got hemp, you got the cannabis, but hemp itself is an amazing plant. It actually, the biomass you get out of a field or an acre of hemp compared to other agricultural grows, and including trees for paper, is unbelievable. It's unlimited what you can do with hemp. It's a strong tensile strength, the fiber. It lasts long. It's durable. It's not that, obviously it has its complexities in growing, but it's not that difficult once you understand how to grow the plant. So there's so much exciting things that can happen. And there's a lot of work in progress on that side. But to your point, that's part of the market too. That's part of the market size. So I agree with Jason. I think that's a low number. That's a very low number. There's a lot of room to grow.
And outside of the banking and the research, Rob, is there any other key drivers that you think will be driving the market forward?
I think, Jason hit on it, but I think the U.S. rescheduling is going to be, that's the key drive. It's going to drive the rest globally to really fall in line. There's no question about it.
Yeah. I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today and providing us with some information about your companies and your thoughts on the cannabis market more broadly. Rob, where can people get more information about CURR Pharmaceuticals?
So on our website, currpharmaceutical.com or currpharma.com, either way. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have accounts all over social media, I think, but those are the best places to get some information.
Okay, great. And Jason, where can people go to find out more about Flora Growth?
Similar, floragrowth.com, floragrowth.ca, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. You have my name. Reach out to me. I'll say hello.
Great. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.